I watched Madison finalize the catering order with a smile so sweet it could rot teeth. Yes, peanut butter cups in every dessert, she cooed into the phone, her eyes locked on mine. My sister is obsessed with them. My throat tightened reflexively, the phantom memory of anaphylaxis still burned in my lungs. In my first life, I died at my sweet 16, throat swelling shut while Madison played innocent, claiming she'd forgotten about my severe peanut allergy. The party guests had thought I was choking on excitement. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was already gone. But that was 2 years ago, or rather 2 years from now. Time is funny when you die at 16 and wake up at 14. Sounds perfect, I said, keeping my voice light and eager. You're the best sister ever, Maddie. The flicker of satisfaction in her green eyes told me everything. She thought she was so clever, already planning my murder while playing the devoted stepsister. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd already lived this nightmare once. And this time, I wasn't the naive little fool who'd trusted her family. This time, I was going to let her dig her own grave. The memories hit me the morning of my 14th birthday, sudden and overwhelming as a tsunami. One moment, I was waking up to Madison's fake enthusiasm and my stepmother Patricia's cold smile. The next, I was drowning in 2 lifetimes of memories. The taste of my last breath, the betrayal in my father's eyes when Patricia convinced him I'd been experimenting with drugs to explain away my death. The way Madison had cried at my funeral while wearing my favorite necklace, the one she'd claimed to have lost weeks before. I'd spent that first day back in a daze, expecting to wake from the nightmare. But as weeks turned into months, the truth became inescapable. I'd been given a second chance, thrust back into my 14-year-old body with all the memories of my first 16 years intact. The abuse was exactly as I remembered it. Patricia had married my father, Richard Thornton, when I was 10, bringing Madison, then 12, into our home. Dad was a successful commercial real estate developer, wealthy enough that Patricia had quit her job as a sales manager the day after the wedding. She'd promised to be a full-time mother to both of us. What she'd really become was a full-time monster. It started small. My favorite foods disappeared from the house while Madison's preferences dominated every meal. My clothes went missing, only to reappear in Madison's closet. When I complained, Patricia's face would harden into lines of disappointment. Lily, we're a family now. Families share. You're being selfish. Dad, who worked 60-hour weeks, saw none of it. At home, Patricia was all gentle smiles and soft words. Madison played the sweet younger sister, always asking to borrow my things, always apologizing when they came back damaged. To everyone else, we were the picture-perfect, blended family. By the time I was 12 in my first life, the abuse had escalated. Patricia controlled everything, my schedule, my friends, my activities. Madison got private tutors and art lessons. I got lectures about being lazy and ungrateful when my grades slipped because I was doing Madison's homework along with my own. Patricia had discovered the perfect threat early on. If I complained to Dad, she'd make his life miserable. She'd pick fights with him, cry about how I was rejecting her love, make him feel guilty for bringing strife into the home. Dad, conflict-averse and exhausted, started choosing the path of least resistance, which meant choosing Patricia's version of reality over mine. Your stepmother's trying so hard, Lily, Miss say. He'd say, his eyes pleading with me to just go along. Can't you meet her halfway? What he didn't see was that halfway meant giving up everything. My room became Madison's art studio temporarily. I slept on a fold-out couch in the den. My college fund, left by my late mother, was borrowed to pay for Madison's private school tuition. My belongings became community property while Madison's remained sacred. The worst part was how they made me believe I deserved it. That I was the problem. That if I just tried harder, loved more, sacrificed more, I could earn my place in my own family. By 15, I was a ghost in my own home. Invisible unless they needed something from me. The Sweet 16 was supposed to be my redemption. Dad had actually promised, that this would be my day. For once, I'd be the center of attention. He'd even argued with Patricia about it, insisting that I deserved something special. I'd been so pathetically grateful, so desperately hopeful. Patricia had smiled and agreed, then immediately handed all the planning to Madison. It'll be wonderful for them to bond, she'd told Dad. Madison has such creative vision. Madison's vision had involved killing me. The party itself had been beautiful. I remembered that even through the haze of dying. Pink and gold decorations, a chocolate fountain, a DJ spinning top 40 hits. All my classmates were there, along with Dad's business associates and their families. I'd felt like a princess for exactly 20 minutes before taking that first bite of chocolate truffle. The peanut oil had been mixed into everything. Not enough to taste, but more than enough to kill someone with my level of allergy. Madison had watched me with glittering eyes as I'd eaten that first truffle, watched as my lips started to swell, watched as I'd collapsed. In the chaos, she'd disappeared my EpiPen from my purse. I'd died on my sweet 16, surrounded by people, choking on my own throat, while Madison stood in the corner with tears streaming down her face and murder in her smile. The last thing I'd seen was Patricia whispering in Dad's ear, already crafting the narrative that would absolve them both. Now, at 14, with 2 years of foresight, I understood exactly what I was dealing with. Patricia wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. Every abuse was deniable, every cruelty wrapped in a layer of plausible deniability. And Madison? Madison was a sociopath who'd learned at her mother's knee that some people were simply worth less than others. In my first life, I'd been one of those worthless people. This time would be different. The key was patience. I'd died at 16, which meant I had 2 years to prepare. 2 years to document everything. 2 years to become someone they couldn't simply erase. But more importantly, I had knowledge they couldn't imagine. I knew every move they'd make because they'd already made them. I knew which of Dad's business deals would succeed and which would fail. I knew that Madison's art teacher would be caught in a scandal next year. I knew that Patricia's sister would get divorced and need a place to stay. I knew that in exactly 2 years, they planned to kill me. So I played along. I became the perfect victim again. Meek, eager to please, desperate for scraps of affection. I let Patricia borrow money from my account. Only small amounts now, but I documented every transaction. I let Madison accidentally ruin my clothes and forget to tell me about important events. I smiled through every slight, every casual cruelty, every moment of calculated neglect. And I planned. The first step was securing my future. At 14, I couldn't legally control my mother's trust fund, but I could make sure no one else touched it either. I accidentally let slip to Dad's accountant, Mr. Harrison, an old friend of my mother's who'd always been kind to me, that I was worried about my college fund. Just a casual comment. Teenage anxiety about the future. Mr. Harrison had been quietly outraged to discover that $50,000 had already been withdrawn for educational expenses. A week later, Dad received a very formal letter from the trust's management company outlining new restrictions on withdrawals and requiring my signature on any future requests. Patricia had been furious, but there was nothing she could do without exposing herself. "Lily, honey, this makes things so difficult," she'd said, her voice honey-sweet and razor-sharp. "What if there's an emergency? What if Madison needs something for school?" "I'm sure Dad can handle Madison's expenses," I'd replied innocently. "The trust is for my future. Mom would have wanted that." Bringing up my dead mother always shut Patricia down. Dad, guilt-ridden over having moved on, couldn't argue with the invocation of his first wife's memory. Round 1 to me. The second step was more delicate. I needed to become valuable. In my first life, I'd been so beaten down that I'd hidden my intelligence, afraid that outshining Madison would make things worse. This time, I let myself excel, but strategically. I didn't dominate every subject. That would have been suspicious and would have made Madison's jealousy explosive. Instead, I became exceptional in ways that benefited Dad's social standing. I joined the debate team and won regional competitions. I started volunteering at the Children's Hospital, where Dad's company was a major donor, making sure to be photographed for their newsletter. I wrote an essay about family bonds that won a local contest and was published in the newspaper, complete with a photo of me, Dad, Patricia, and Madison looking picture perfect. Dad loved it. Suddenly, his quiet daughter was an asset to his reputation. Business associates commented on my achievements. Patricia couldn't openly sabotage me without looking like a monster. But privately, the abuse intensified. Madison started borrowing my homework and forgetting to return it before deadlines. Patricia scheduled her shopping trips during my important events, taking the car so I had no transportation. My laptop mysteriously developed problems every time I had a major project due. They were trying to break me again, make me fail so spectacularly that Dad would dismiss my earlier successes as flukes. But I'd lived this before. I knew their playbook. For every sabotage, I had a backup plan. I kept copies of everything in cloud storage they didn't know about. I built relationships with teachers who remembered my mother and were sympathetic to my situation. I learned to document everything, screenshots, recordings, time-stamped emails. I was building a case file, though I wasn't sure yet who the jury would be. 6 months into my second chance at age 14, Madison made her first major mistake. She stole my phone and sent a series of cruel messages to my best friend Zara, claiming I'd been talking behind her back. In my first life, this had worked. Zara and I had fought, and I'd lost my only real friend, making me even more isolated and vulnerable. This time, I'd expected it. I'd already told Zara about my suspicious stepsister, planting seeds of doubt. When the messages came through, Zara called me instead of responding. I played confused and hurt, suggested maybe my phone had been hacked, got Dad involved. The phone company's records showed the messages had been sent from our home address while I was verifiably at debate practice. The IP address matched Madison's laptop. Patricia tried to claim Madison was borrowing my phone to check something, but Madison, in a moment of panic, denied ever having my phone at all. Their stories contradicted, and Dad, for the first time, looked at his stepdaughter with suspicion. "It must have been a virus or something," Patricia finally said, her smile tight. "These things happen with teenagers and technology." Dad let it drop, but I saw the crack in his certainty. The tiniest fissure in his belief that everything in our home was perfect. I didn't push, not yet. But I filed away his moment of doubt like a precious gem. The summer before I turned 15, Patricia announced that Madison would be planning my Sweet 16. "It'll be such good practice for her event planning class," she gushed, while Madison beamed beside her. "And you two will grow so much closer through the process. Isn't that right, Madison?" "I've already got so many ideas," Madison said, squeezing my hand with fingers that felt like talons. "It's going to be a party you'll never forget." My blood went cold with remembered prophecy. Here it was, the beginning of the end for my first life. The party planning that was really murder planning. "That sounds amazing," I said, matching Madison's enthusiasm. "I can't wait." Dad looked relieved that we were bonding. Patricia looked satisfied. Madison looked triumphant. And I looked compliant, hiding the steel growing in my spine. Because this time, I wasn't going to let them kill me. This time, I was going to kill their entire world. The planning sessions started immediately. Madison wanted to meet every weekend to discuss themes, venues, guest lists. Patricia encouraged it, pleased to see us acting like real sisters. I played along perfectly. I let Madison pitch increasingly elaborate ideas. A garden party at an upscale venue, a formal dinner dance, a destination celebration. I nodded and smiled and agreed to everything, watching her build the framework of my death. What she didn't know was that I was recording every session on a hidden device Mr. Harrison had helped me acquire. She also didn't know that I'd already been in contact with my mother's family, grandparents who lived on the other side of the country and who Patricia had carefully isolated me from. In my first life, I'd never questioned why Grandma Rose and Grandpa James rarely visited or called. Patricia had always had explanations. They were busy, they were traveling, they were elderly and forgetful. I'd believed her because I'd wanted to believe someone cared about me, even distantly. The truth, which I'd discovered through some careful internet stalking in this second life, was that Patricia had been intercepting their letters and calls for years. She'd told them I was troubled and didn't want contact, while telling me they were too old to deal with a teenager. At 14 years old in my second chance, I'd gotten a private phone number and called them. "Lily?" Grandma Rose's voice had broken with emotion. "Oh, honey, is it really you?" They'd been trying to reach me for years. They sent birthday cards and Christmas presents that I'd never received. They'd even tried to visit once, but Patricia claimed I was at camp and refused to give them any contact information. She said you were going through a rebellious phase, Grandpa James said, his voice hard with anger. Said you'd asked not to be contacted. We didn't want to push if it would hurt you, but it's been killing us, sweetheart. I'd cried then, real tears for the first time since waking up in my 14-year-old body. Someone actually cared. Someone had been fighting for me, even if I hadn't known it. I need your help, I told them, but we have to be careful, and I need you to trust me, even if what I ask seems strange. They'd agreed without hesitation. So, while Madison planned my murder and Patricia enabled her sociopathic daughter, I was building a safety net they couldn't see. My grandparents were wealthy, old money from my great-grandfather's shipping business. They were also connected with lawyers and accountants and friends in various useful places. They couldn't remove me from Dad's house without his permission, which he'd never grant. But they could watch and wait and prepare. Document everything, Grandpa James instructed during one of our secret phone calls. Don't confront them. Don't give them any warning that you know what they're doing. Let them think they're winning. I am, I assured him. I'm letting them win right up until the moment they lose everything. The allergy revelation came in October, 3 months into planning my Sweet 16. Oh my God, Lily, I completely forgot, Madison said, hand flying to her mouth in performative horror. She was showing me photos of an elaborate dessert table, every item featuring chocolate and peanut butter. You're allergic to peanuts. We'll have to change everything. She was testing me, I realized. Seeing if I'd make a fuss, if I'd be difficult. In my first life, I'd been apologetic about my allergy, like it was a character flaw. I'd told her it was fine, that we didn't need to change everything, that I didn't want to be a bother. This time, I met her eyes directly. Yeah, we definitely need to change it. Anaphylaxis isn't really a fun party theme. Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Of course, I'm so silly. I'll redesign everything to be completely peanut-free. Thanks, Maddie, I said sweetly. I knew I could count on you. But I'd seen it. The moment she'd realized she had her murder weapon. From that day forward, every dessert option she suggested was suspiciously focused on foods that could be made peanut-free. Every venue had unfortunately limited options for allergy-friendly catering. Every decision seemed designed to make me lower my guard about the one thing that could kill me. I played along, pretending to be reassured, pretending to trust her. Meanwhile, I quietly ordered medical-grade EpiPens and stashed them everywhere. In my school locker, in my debate bag, in a hiding spot in my bathroom, in my car once I got my license at 15. I wore a medical alert bracelet and made sure everyone at school knew about my allergy. I became hyper-vigilant in a way I'd never been in my first life. And I waited for Madison to make her move. 15 came and went in a blur of careful deception. I maintained my perfect victim persona while secretly building my independence. I got a job at a local bookstore that Dad's friend owned, claiming I wanted to learn responsibility. The real reason was to have my own money and my own space away from Patricia's control. I turned out to be good at retail, good at recommending books to customers, good at creating displays that sold merchandise. The owner, Mrs. Chen, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who'd known my mother in high school. You have your mother's charm, she told me one day, watching me chat with a customer. And her spine, I think, though you hide it better. Sometimes you have to hide your strength, I said carefully, until the right moment. Mrs. Chen studied me with knowing eyes. Very wise. Your mother knew that too. She waited until she had all her ducks in a row before leaving your father's first business partner. He'd been embezzling for years, but she gathered evidence quietly until she could prove everything. I hadn't known that story. What happened to the partner? Prison, Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. Your mother believed in justice, but she believed in patient justice. Don't act until you can win completely. She paused, then added softly, if you ever need anything, Lily, anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Understand? I understood. My mother's friends were everywhere, I was realizing. People who'd loved her, who felt guilty for not protecting her daughter better. I was discovering a whole network of potential allies who'd been waiting for me to reach out. I was also discovering that Patricia had systematically isolated me from all of them. That Christmas, Patricia announced that we'd be spending the holidays just the four of us at a mountain cabin. No extended family, no friends, no contact with the outside world. It'll be so intimate, she cooed. Quality family time. What it really was, I knew from my first life's memories, was a test run for isolation. In my original timeline, they'd used this trip to gasoline me, making me feel so unwelcome, so burdensome, that by the time we returned home, I was completely psychologically broken. This Christmas would be different. I went along with the trip cheerfully, packing my bags without complaint, but I also made sure to tell several people exactly where we'd be and when we'd return. I left my laptop with Mrs. Chen for safekeeping, with a note that said, "If I'm not back by January 2nd, contact my grandparents and open the folder labeled Insurance." The cabin trip was exactly as miserable as I remembered. Madison and Patricia shared the master bedroom with the fireplace. Dad got the second bedroom. I was given a tiny storage room with a camping cot, no heat, and a window that didn't quite close. "Is this really my room?" I asked Dad, trying to keep my voice neutral. "It's just for a few nights, Lily," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Madison needs the space for her art supplies." Madison needed a room for art supplies while I froze in a storage closet. The symbolism wasn't subtle. That night, I heard them through the thin walls. "She's being so dramatic about the room," Patricia said. "It's perfectly fine and it's only temporary." "Maybe we should," Dad started. "Richard, you promised we'd have a relaxing vacation. Are you really going to let Lily ruin it with her complaints? She has a bed and a roof. When I was her age, I would have been grateful." The conversation I'd heard before, word for word. Dad's guilt being weaponized against his better instincts. I spent that Christmas taking long walks with my phone, documenting everything. The unheated room, the lack of food at meals. Madison and Patricia had accidentally forgotten to account for my portions. The way they'd planned activities that excluded me, then acted hurt when I didn't want to participate. I took photos, I took videos. I built my case file. And on Christmas morning, when they gave Madison a new laptop and gave me a pair of socks, I smiled and thanked them graciously while the recorder in my pocket captured every moment. "You're so ungrateful," Patricia hissed later when we were alone. "Do you know how hard your father works? How difficult you make everything? Madison appreciates what she has. Why can't you be more like her?" "I'm trying," I said meekly, playing my part. "I'm really trying, Patricia." "Try harder," she snapped. "Or maybe next Christmas you can stay home alone." I nodded, looking properly chastised, but inside I was counting down. One more year. One more year, and they'd make their final move, and I'd be ready. 16 arrived on a cold February morning. Dad took me to breakfast, just the two of us, a rare moment of actual father-daughter time. "I'm proud of you, Lily," he said over pancakes. "You've really matured this year. Patricia said you've been so helpful with Madison, so patient." Patricia would say that. It kept him blind. "I'm trying to be a good sister," I said. "Madison's been working so hard on the Sweet 16 planning." "About that," Dad leaned forward. "I want you to know, this party is for you. It's your day. If there's anything you want to change, anything you want to add, you just say the word." He meant it. In this moment, with Patricia nowhere around to influence him, he actually meant it. "There is one thing," I said carefully. "Could we do it in June instead of February? I know it's traditional to do it on your actual birthday, but June is when Mom had hers, and I thought—" I let my voice trail off, loading it with daughterly emotion. Dad's eyes went soft. "That's a beautiful idea. Your mom would love that." He squeezed my hand. This wasn't sentiment, though I did miss my mother with an ache that never faded. This was strategy. June gave me 4 more months to prepare. 4 more months to gather evidence. 4 more months to become exactly who I needed to be. 4 more months to finalize my revenge. Madison was predictably furious about the date change, but she couldn't say why without exposing her intentions. She'd already been researching peanut oil suppliers. I'd discovered through a carefully placed keylogger on her laptop. She'd been browsing anaphylaxis symptoms and average response times. She'd even joined an online forum about severe allergies where she'd asked detailed questions about cross-contamination. All documented, all saved, all ready to be used. June is actually perfect, she finally said through gritted teeth. More outdoor venue options. Plus, it gives you more time to perfect everything, Patricia added smoothly. My daughter's attention to detail is extraordinary. My daughter, never our daughters, never us. Always Madison elevated, me diminished. I can't wait to see what you've planned, I told Madison with genuine anticipation. Because I already knew what she'd planned, and I knew exactly how it would backfire. The next 4 months were a masterclass in deception on both sides. Madison finalized her murder plans while I finalized my counteroffensive. Patricia continued her campaign of calculated cruelty while I documented every instance. Dad remained willfully blind while I made sure others could see clearly. I joined a teen support group at school for blended families, where I carefully shared vague concerns about feeling overlooked and different from my stepsister. The counselor, Ms. Rodriguez, started paying attention. She made notes. She asked careful questions. I accidentally left my journal where Dad might find it, filled with heartbreaking entries about feeling unloved but never quite accusing anyone of anything specific. Just the desperate thoughts of a teenage girl trying to fit into a family that didn't want her. He didn't read it. Patricia found it first and destroyed it, but not before I'd photographed every page. I was a ghost building a haunted house, laying clues and evidence everywhere, creating a trail that would only be visible once someone knew to look. And I made sure my grandparents knew exactly when to look. June 15th, I told them during one of our secret calls, and that's the day. Whatever happens, you need to be ready to act. We'll be there, Grandma Rose promised. Not at the party. Patricia would never allow that, but close by, watching. I'm bringing reinforcements, Grandpa James added grimly. Lawyers, investigators, the works, if they do what you think they're going to do, they will, I interrupted. They already did. They just don't know I remember. May came with a flurry of final party preparations. The venue was locked in, an upscale garden restaurant that Madison had chosen specifically for its award-winning kitchen. The guest list was finalized. 200 people, including Dad's most important business contacts, my entire school class, and half the local social elite. It was going to be a spectacle. Madison wanted witnesses to my death, I realized. She wanted everyone to see me at my peak before I fell, wanted the tragedy to be as public and dramatic as possible. Maybe she thought it would make Dad love her more, seeing her grieve so beautifully. The menu was set. Madison presented it to me with such pride. Everything is completely peanut-free, she assured me, showing me the catering contract. I've been working with the chef personally. You're going to be so safe, Lily. I've thought of everything. She had thought of everything, except that I'd already contacted the restaurant directly, spoken to the owner, and made special arrangements. My stepsister is planning a surprise, I told him, looking earnest and worried. But I have a severe peanut allergy, and I'm afraid she might not understand how serious it is. She's never had to deal with food allergies before. The owner, Mr. Castellano, had been immediately concerned. We take allergies very seriously. I'll personally oversee. Please don't tell her I called, I'd interrupted. She's trying so hard to make this perfect. I don't want to hurt her feelings. Just, could you double-check everything? Maybe have a separate prep area for my food? And if anyone tries to bring in outside desserts or make last-minute changes to my meals, could you let me know? He'd agreed, charmed by my apparent concern for my stepsister's feelings and my mature handling of my allergy. I'd also mailed him a detailed list of everything Madison had been researching about peanut contamination with a note, I found this on her laptop. I'm probably being paranoid. She's probably just being thorough. But I'm scared. Please help me stay safe. Mr. Castellano had called me back personally. Miss Thornton, I think you should talk to your father about this. I will, I'd lied. After the party, I don't want to ruin it if I'm wrong. Now, 3 weeks before my sweet 16, Mr. Castellano was watching Madison like a hawk. He'd also quietly alerted his staff to be vigilant and had installed additional security cameras in the kitchen. Madison had no idea she was already caught. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about stopping my murder, this was about destroying them so completely that they could never hurt anyone again. 2 weeks before the party, I turned 18. Nobody knew, or rather, nobody in my house knew. Because in my first life, I died at 16, and in this life, I'd been reborn at 14. I was living my second chance at these teen years, but my actual age, counting from my original birth, had just hit 18. Legally, I was still 16. The universe wasn't going to issue me new documents, but mentally, emotionally, experientially, I was an adult who'd lived through death and come back for vengeance. I was also an adult who'd been secretly taking college classes online for the past year, who'd been building a business plan, who'd been preparing for complete independence the moment my trust fund became fully accessible at 18, which, according to the original terms my mother had set up, was now. I'd been in contact with the trust lawyers for months, explaining my situation carefully. They'd been skeptical at first. What 16-year-old tries to access an 18-year-old trust? But I demonstrated thorough financial literacy, provided detailed plans for the funds, and most importantly, I'd made it clear that I believed my stepmother was attempting to defraud the trust. They'd launched a quiet investigation. What they'd found had made them very, very interested in helping me. Patricia had forged my signature multiple times on withdrawal requests. She'd claimed educational expenses that were never actually spent on my education. She'd even attempted to transfer guardianship of the trust to herself, citing my emotional instability. All of it documented, all of it illegal. "We can't release the funds to you until you're legally 18, the head lawyer, Mr. Yamamoto, had told me. But we can freeze the account entirely, prevent any further access, and begin building a case for fraud. When you do turn 18, there's a possibility we could even recover the stolen funds." "Do it," I'd said. "And don't tell my father. Patricia handles all his financial communications. I want this to come as a complete surprise." The freeze had gone into effect in April. Patricia had been trying to withdraw $100,000 for Madison's education and had been denied. According to Mr. Yamamoto's assistant, who thought the whole situation was deliciously dramatic and had become my unofficial spy, Patricia had screamed at 3 different bank representatives before threatening legal action. "She's retaining a lawyer," the assistant, Jenny, had told me gleefully during one of our calls. "She's claiming you're being manipulated by your mother's family." "Perfect," I'd said. Let her waste money on lawyers. It'll just make the fraud charges more interesting." But that was just the opening salvo. The trust fund battle was a distraction, something to keep Patricia busy while I prepared the main event. Because on June 15th at my Sweet 16 party, I wasn't just going to expose Madison's murder plot, I was going to destroy them all. 1 week before the party, I sat down with Dad in his study. It was late evening, one of the rare times he was home, and Patricia wasn't hovering. "Dad," I said quietly, "can I ask you something about Mom?" He looked up from his laptop, surprised. I rarely brought up my mother. It was too painful in my first life, and in this life, I'd been avoiding it to keep Patricia from interfering. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to know?" "Did she ever—" I hesitated, as if gathering courage. "Did she ever feel like you couldn't see what was happening? Like she was trying to tell you something, but you weren't hearing it?" Dad's face went carefully neutral. "Why would you ask that?" "I've been reading her journals," I said. This was true. I'd found them hidden in the attic during my first life and had retrieved them earlier in this one. She wrote about feeling invisible, sometimes. About trying to make you understand something, but feeling like you only saw what you wanted to see. "Lily, I'm not accusing you of anything," I interrupted gently. "I'm just trying to understand her, and maybe understand myself." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew. She was also one of the most patient. She had a way of seeing problems clearly and dealing with them methodically." He paused. "Sometimes I think she saw problems I wasn't ready to acknowledge." "Like what?" "Like my first business partner embezzling funds. She tried to tell me for months, but I thought she was being paranoid. By the time I listened, he'd taken almost $1 million. Dad rubbed his face tiredly. She forgave me for not trusting her sooner. But I don't think I ever quite forgave myself. This was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, in either life. Do you ever worry you're doing it again? I asked softly. Not seeing something that's right in front of you? He looked at me sharply. What do you mean? Nothing specific, I said, retreating slightly. Just, sometimes I wonder if we're as happy as we look. If our family is as perfect as everyone says. Are you unhappy, Lily? The question was so direct, so painfully earnest that I almost broke. Almost told him everything right then. But that would have been a mistake. Patricia would spin it, Madison would deny everything, and I'd lose my advantage. I'm okay, I said instead. Just feeling philosophical before my big party? Ignore me. But I'd planted the seed. When everything came crashing down, Dad would remember this conversation. He'd remember me trying to tell him, remember his mother trying to tell him, remember his pattern of not seeing until it was almost too late. This time wouldn't be too late. This time, I'd make sure he saw everything. 3 days before the party, Madison made her final preparations. I knew because I'd hacked into her computer months ago and had been watching her every move. The keylogger software I'd installed captured everything: her emails, her searches, her document drafts. She'd been communicating with someone named Chris through an encrypted messaging app. Chris, I'd discovered through some careful investigation, was a guy she'd met at an art show who had a juvenile record for dealing drugs. Madison thought she was being clever, using him as her peanut oil supplier. What she didn't know was that Chris had become very nervous about a teenage girl asking detailed questions about allergens and how to hide them in food. Nervous enough to mention it to his parole officer. Nervous enough that his parole officer had flagged it as suspicious behavior. I'd made sure of that by sending an anonymous tip to the parole office suggesting they monitor Chris's communications with minors. The police had been watching Madison's plot unfold for weeks, waiting to see if it was real or just morbid curiosity. On June 12th, 3 days before my party, Madison received a package from Chris. I watched through the security camera I'd secretly installed in her room as she opened it. A bottle of pure peanut oil and a detailed instruction note on how to incorporate it into food without detection. She smiled as she read it. Actually smiled. I took screenshots of everything and forwarded them to the file I'd been compiling. Then I went downstairs and asked Patricia if I could help with any last-minute party preparations. How sweet, Patricia said, though her eyes were cold. But Madison has everything under control. Why don't you just rest and get ready to enjoy your special day? I'm so lucky to have you both, I said earnestly. Most people don't have family who care this much. Patricia's smile was like a knife. That's right, Lily. You're very lucky. I hope you remember that. I would remember. I'd remember everything. The morning of June 15th dawned bright and clear. I woke early in my room. I'd finally gotten it back from Madison's temporary art studio after 18 months, and went through my careful preparations. First, I took one of my many hidden EpiPens and put it in my bra. Not the most comfortable location, but impossible for Madison to steal without physically assaulting me. Second, I texted Mr. Castellano at the restaurant. Today's the day. Please be careful. Third, I called my grandparents. It's happening. Are you ready? We're already in town, Grandpa James confirmed. Lawyers are standing by. We have a family court judge on call. The moment you give the signal, we're coming in. Fourth, I sent a message to Ms. Rodriguez, my school counselor. Thank you for listening to me this year. Today you'll understand why I needed someone to know. And fifth, I sent an email to Dad's personal address, not his work email that Patricia monitored, but the private one he used for important personal correspondence. The subject line was, "To be opened only if something happens to me at the party today." The body of the email contained links to every piece of evidence I'd collected over the past 2 years. Every recording, every screenshot, every document, everything. If you're reading this, I wrote, something has gone wrong, but Dad, I need you to know I tried to tell you. I tried so many times in so many ways. I love you, and I hope you can forgive yourself for not seeing sooner. This isn't your fault. It's theirs. Love, Lily. I didn't send it. I scheduled it to send automatically at 8 p.m., 2 hours after the party was supposed to end. If everything went according to my plan, I'd cancel it before then. But if something went wrong, if Madison somehow succeeded despite all my precautions, Dad would know the truth. My death wouldn't be in vain a second time. The party began at 4 p.m. The garden restaurant was transformed into something magical. Strings of lights woven through trees, flowers, everywhere. A live band playing soft music. It was beautiful enough to photograph, dramatic enough to remember. Perfect for the trap I'd set. I arrived with Dad, Patricia, and Madison, all of us dressed in formal wear. I wore a pink dress that Madison had helped me choose, probably because she thought it would photograph well at my funeral. My hair was styled in soft curls, my makeup professionally done. I looked like a princess. I felt like a warrior. Guests were already arriving, my classmates, Dad's colleagues, neighbors, everyone Madison had invited to witness my death. They complimented the decorations, admired the venue, told Madison how talented she was. She glowed under the attention, already playing the devoted sister before she'd even committed her murder. I made my rounds, greeting everyone graciously. I found Mr. Castellano and confirmed with a glance that his staff was ready. I spotted the unmarked car across the street where plainclothes officers were monitoring the situation. Chris had worn a wire to his meeting with Madison, and they had everything they needed for an attempted murder charge. I saw my grandparents standing at the back of the garden, technically not invited, but also not leaving. Patricia noticed them and went pale. "What are they doing here?" she hissed to Dad. "They're Lily's grandparents," Dad said, confused. "Why shouldn't they be here?" "You know they make things difficult." "Patricia, not today, please." The first crack in their united front. Everything was falling into place. Dinner was served at 5 p.m. Long tables under the trees, family-style platters of food, everything elegant and expensive. I ate carefully, watching Madison watch me. She kept glancing at the dessert table being set up nearby, her eyes bright with anticipation. She thought she'd won, thought that in another hour I'd be dead and she'd be free to take my place as Dad's only daughter, free to drain my trust fund, free to eliminate the competition she'd always resented. Speeches came after dinner. Dad stood up and gave a touching tribute to his wonderful daughter and his blended family. Patricia smiled serenely. Madison looked emotional. I stood and thanked everyone for coming, keeping my voice steady and sweet. "I'm so grateful for my family," I said, looking directly at Madison. "Especially my sister, who worked so hard to make this day perfect. Madison, you've really outdone yourself." She smiled at me, and for just a moment, I saw the truth in her eyes, the hatred, the triumph, the certainty that she was about to win. "It's all for you, Esesu," she said. "You deserve something unforgettable." "I'm sure I'll never forget this day," I agreed. Dessert was announced. The staff began bringing out trays of elaborate confections, cakes, pastries, chocolate sculptures. Everything looked beautiful and expensive and, according to the labels, completely peanut-free. Madison made a show of presenting me with a special dessert she'd arranged personally, a chocolate truffle tower decorated with gold leaf. "The chef made this one especially for you," she said, her voice carrying across the garden. "It's your favorite flavors." I looked at the tower. In my first life, I'd eaten one of those truffles and died. In this life, I knew they were loaded with peanut oil. "How thoughtful," I said. I picked up one of the truffles, examined it, and then set it back down. "You know what? I'm actually too full from dinner. Would you like one, Maddie?" A flicker of frustration crossed her face. "But I made them for you." "You made them?" I asked innocently. "I thought the restaurant chef, I designed them," she corrected quickly. "With the chef." "Try one, Lily, please." The guests were watching now, sensing something strange in the exchange. "I really can't," I said, "but I don't want them to go to waste." I raised my voice slightly. "Actually, before we have dessert, there's something I need to share with everyone." Dad looked surprised. Patricia looked alarmed. Madison looked panicked. This party is really special, I continued, pulling out my phone, and I wanted to make sure we documented everything, so I've been recording. I pulled up the folder on my phone and connected it to the venue's presentation screen, something I'd arranged with Mr. Castellano weeks ago. "What are you doing?" Patricia asked sharply. "Sharing memories," I said. And I pressed play. The first video was Madison in her room opening the package from Chris, her smile as she read instructions for contaminating food with allergens. Gasps from the crowd. The second video was a recording of Madison's computer screen showing her searches. How much peanut oil to kill someone. Anaphylaxis death timeline. Allergen cross-contamination. More gasps. Someone said, "Oh my God." The third video was security footage from the restaurant kitchen, from yesterday when Madison had come in early claiming she wanted to help with final preparations. The footage showed her alone in the prep area, using a syringe to inject something into the chocolate truffles while glancing around nervously. "Lily, stop this right now!" Patricia shrieked, lunging for my phone. But Grandpa James was already there, blocking her. "Let her finish." "This isn't... You can't..." Madison was backing away, her face white. "I'm not done," I said calmly. And I played the final video. It was a compilation of the past 2 years, Patricia stealing from my trust fund with bank records overlaid, Madison's cruel text from my phone to Zara with IP evidence, the Christmas cabin trip with me in the storage room while Madison luxuriated. Every casual cruelty, every calculated abuse, every moment of them plotting against me. "You're wondering how I have all this," I said to the silent, shocked crowd. "How I knew to look, how I knew to record, how I knew what they were planning." I turned to Madison. "Wanted to tell them, or should I?" "You're insane," Madison hissed. "This is edited. It's fake. You're trying to..." "I died," I said simply. Everyone went silent. 2 years ago, I died at my Sweet 16 party. You poisoned me with peanut oil, watched me suffocate, and stole my EpiPen so I couldn't save myself. I looked around at the stunned faces. "I know it sounds impossible, but I remember dying, I remember being reborn, and I remember everything you did." "She's having a psychotic break," Patricia said desperately. "Richard, your daughter needs help. She's fantasizing..." "Is she?" Grandpa James stepped forward. "Up. Because we had the chocolate truffles tested this morning. The ones Madison specially arranged. Want to guess what we found?" Peanut oil. The answer hung in the air. "We also have testimony from one Chris Brennan," a new voice said. One of the plainclothes officers was coming forward, badge out. "Who sold peanut oil to Madison Thornton specifically for use in contaminating food at this party? He's been cooperating with our investigation for the past 3 weeks." Madison bolted. She didn't get far. The second officer caught her before she reached the garden gate. The party dissolved into chaos. Guests were calling the police, calling lawyers, recording everything on their phones. Patricia was screaming about persecution and false accusations. Madison was sobbing that it was a misunderstanding, and Dad was staring at me with horror and heartbreak. "Lily," he whispered. How long have you been living like this?" "Since you married her," I said quietly. "Since you chose to believe that our family was perfect instead of listening when I tried to tell you it wasn't." His face crumpled. Before he could respond, Grandma Rose was there, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You're safe now, baby. You're safe." The aftermath unfolded over the next several weeks like dominoes falling. Madison was arrested and charged with attempted murder. At 17, she'd be tried as a juvenile, but the premeditation and the evidence made it clear she'd face serious consequences. Her lawyer tried to claim she'd been influenced by her mother, but the recordings of her gleefully planning my death made that defense weak. Patricia was charged with fraud for the trust fund embezzlement, forgery for the fake signatures, and conspiracy to commit murder for her role in enabling Madison's plot. The evidence was overwhelming. She tried to turn on Madison, claiming she'd known nothing about the murder plot, but no one believed her. Most devastatingly, text messages between Patricia and Madison discussing the Lily problem and permanent solutions proved they'd been plotting together for at least a year. Dad's world shattered. The woman he'd loved had tried to kill his daughter. The stepdaughter he'd defended had been planning murder. The family he'd believed in was built on lies. "I'm so sorry," he told me over and over in the weeks that followed. "I'm so sorry I didn't see. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." "I tried to tell you," I said. Not cruelly, but honestly. "I tried in so many ways." "You shouldn't have had to try," he said. "You're my daughter. I should have known." We were in family therapy now, real therapy, with Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen from the bookstore, a specialist in family trauma and abuse. It was painful, necessary work. "She's going to carry this for the rest of her life," Dr. Chen told Dad in one of their sessions that I sat in on. "The knowledge that her own family tried to kill her. The knowledge that you chose to believe others over her for years." "How do I fix it?" Dad asked desperately. "You can't," Dr. Chen said bluntly. You can't undo the past. You can only commit to doing better in the future." He was trying. God, he was trying. He'd divorced Patricia immediately. No contest, no negotiation. He'd moved us to a new house where we could start fresh without the ghost of Patricia's presence. He'd changed his work schedule to be home more. He'd started paying attention. But some damage can't be undone. The trust fund case settled quickly once Patricia's fraud was exposed. Not only was she ordered to repay everything she'd stolen, but she also faced criminal penalties. Her assets were seized, her accounts frozen. Madison, in juvenile detention awaiting trial, found her college fund, built with money stolen from me, completely depleted to pay for lawyers. Poetic justice. My grandparents petitioned for custody, but I asked them not to fight Dad for it. "He's learning," I told them, "and I'm old enough to leave if he doesn't." They set up a trust of their own instead, ensuring I'd never need to rely on Dad financially. They visited twice a month and called every week. They made sure I knew I had a safety net. Mrs. Chen from the bookstore offered me a full-time job after graduation. "Your mother would be proud of the woman you're becoming," she said. "Strong and patient and strategic. Just like her." I thought about that often. About my mother who'd tried to tell Dad about problems he didn't want to see, who'd been strong and patient and strategic, who'd believed in justice but waited until she could win completely. I'd learned from her, even though she died when I was 10. I'd learned that revenge isn't about acting in anger, it's about planning in patience. 6 months after my Sweet 16, that wasn't. Madison's trial concluded. She was sentenced to 5 years in juvenile detention, followed by 3 years probation. She'd be monitored, mandated to therapy, and have a permanent record. Patricia got 8 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy. Her lawyer had pushed for a plea deal, but the prosecution wouldn't budge. Too many people had been horrified by the case, which had made national news. Stepmother and daughter plot to murder teen at Sweet 16. We were famous for all the wrong reasons, but we were alive. I was alive. Dad and I watched the sentencing from the courthouse gallery. When it was over, he took my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being strong enough to save yourself," he said. "For not letting them win." I squeezed his hand. "I had help. I couldn't have done it alone." "You shouldn't have had to do it at all." "No, I shouldn't have. But I did, and I had. And I'd won." On my actual 18th birthday, the second time around, I accessed my trust fund fully for the first time. The lawyers had recovered most of what Patricia stole, plus damages. I had enough to pay for college, start a business, and build a completely independent life. I was accepted to my mother's alma mater with a full scholarship based on my debate achievements. I'd be studying business and law because I'd learned firsthand how important it was to understand both. Dad threw me a small party, just family and close friends. My grandparents were there. Miss Chen from the bookstore, Mr. Castellano from the restaurant, Ms. Rodriguez from school, Dr. Chen, my therapist, Zara, my best friend who'd stood by me through everything. No pink and gold decorations, no chocolate fountain, no 200 guests, just people who actually cared about me. Make a wish, Dad said as I stood in front of my birthday cake. I thought about my first life, dying on the floor of a fancy party. I thought about waking up at 14 with memories of death and betrayal. I thought about the 2 years I'd spent planning revenge against people who should have loved me. I thought about Madison in juvenile detention, Patricia in prison, and the family I'd destroyed to save myself. And I thought about what came next: college, career, a life built on my own terms. I don't need to wish, I said, and blew out the candles. Everything I wanted already came true. Because it had. I'd survived, I'd won, I'd gotten justice, and I was finally free. A year later, I was sitting in my dorm room when I got a letter, prison mail from Patricia. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity won. The letter was 3 pages of self-justification and blame shifting. How I'd always been difficult. How she'd tried so hard to be a good stepmother. How I'd ruined her life by being paranoid and vindictive. Not a single apology, not one word of remorse. I read it twice, then filed it with all my other evidence. Because Patricia hadn't learned anything. She still believed she was the victim, still believed she'd done nothing wrong. Some people can't be redeemed, but some people can be stopped. And I'd stopped her. I wrote back one line: I forgive you, but I'll never forget. Neither will anyone else. I never heard from her again. Madison wrote to me too eventually. Her letter was different, younger, more confused, more honest. I don't know why I did it, she wrote. Mom said you were the problem, that you were ruining everything, that you didn't deserve what you had. I believed her. I wanted her to love me more than she loved you, and I thought if you were gone, I'd finally be enough. She was in therapy in juvie, she said, learning about her mother's narcissism, about how she'd been weaponized against me, about how the abuse she'd witnessed had twisted her into someone capable of murder. I'm sorry, she ended the letter. I know it doesn't fix anything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I'm sorry. I didn't write back for weeks. When I did, I kept it simple. I don't forgive you yet. Maybe I never will, but I hope you become someone who deserves forgiveness. I hope you break the cycle your mother started, and I hope you understand that sorry isn't enough. You have to be different. She wrote back months later. She was working in the juvie library, mentoring younger girls, learning to identify abuse patterns. I'm trying, she said. I'm really trying to be better. I believed her, or at least I believed she was trying. Whether she'd succeed, that wasn't my problem anymore. 2 years after my sweet 16 that became a crime scene, I was home for Thanksgiving. Just Dad and me and my grandparents. Small, quiet, peaceful. We didn't talk about Patricia or Madison. We talked about my classes, my internship at a law firm, my plans for the future. Normal family conversation. After dinner, Dad and I took a walk around the neighborhood. The houses were decorated for the holidays, warm light spilling from windows, families visible inside. Do you ever think about what would have happened? Dad asked, quietly. If you hadn't known, if you hadn't stopped them? Every day, I admitted. I'd be dead. You'd be mourning. Patricia would be stealing everything Mom left for me. Madison would probably do it again to someone else. He was quiet for a long moment. How did you know? Really? The story about being reborn? I'd wondered if he believed that part. Most people thought it was a trauma response, a metaphor, a psychological break. Only my grandparents truly believed I'd experienced something supernatural. Does it matter? I asked. Whether it was time travel or precognition or just really good intuition, the result is the same. I suppose not, Dad said. I'm just trying to understand what you went through. Living with that knowledge, that certainty that they were going to kill you. Planning for 2 years, the weight of it. It was heavy, I acknowledged, but lighter than dying would have been. We walked in silence for a while. Then Dad said, your mother would be so proud of you, the way you fought back, the way you were strategic and patient and ultimately triumphant. He paused. I wish I'd been the one to protect you. I wish you hadn't needed to protect yourself. Me too, I said honestly. But I did need to, and I did it. And I survived. You did more than survive, Dad said. Yes, one. You won. I had won, completely and totally. Betsanad was still in juvenile detention, learning to be someone new. Patricia was in prison, her reputation destroyed, her life in ruins. My trust fund was intact and growing. I was at my dream school building my dream future. And I'd learned something important. Justice isn't always given. Sometimes you have to take it. Sometimes you have to be patient enough to let your enemies destroy themselves. Sometimes you have to die and come back to life to get the revenge you deserve. On the third anniversary of my sweet 16, the one that didn't end in death, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. I did it, Mom, I told her tombstone. I survived. I won. I made them pay for everything they did. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and I imagined it was her approval. Dad asked me once if I ever feel guilty, I continued, for destroying our family, for sending Patricia to prison and Madison to juvie, for being so ruthless. I traced my mother's name carved in marble. Helen Margaret Thornton, beloved wife and mother. I don't feel guilty, I said. They destroyed our family long before I fought back. They chose cruelty, they chose greed, they chose murder. A bird landed nearby, cocked its head at me. I just chose to survive. I stood, brushing grass from my knees. I had a paper to write, a life to live, a future to build. But first, I had one more thing to say. Thank you, I told my mother's grave, for teaching me to be strong, for teaching me to be patient, for teaching me that justice is worth waiting for. I left flowers, pink roses, her favorite, and walked back to my car. In my rearview mirror, the cemetery faded away. Ahead of me, the road stretched clear and bright. I'd been given a second chance at life, and I'd used it to take down everyone who'd tried to destroy me. Some people might call that revenge. I called it justice. And it tasted like victory. Epilogue, 5 years later. I graduated law school at the top of my class, specialized in family law and estate planning, with a focus on protecting vulnerable children from predatory family members. Dad and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. He'd learned to listen. I'd learned to trust him again, just a little. Madison got out of juvenile detention after serving her full 5 years. She reached out once, asking to meet for coffee. I declined. Some bridges, once burned, shouldn't be rebuilt. But I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd gone to community college, studied social work, was volunteering with abuse survivors. Maybe she'd become someone better. Maybe she'd break her mother's cycle. I hoped so, for her sake. But I didn't need to be part of that journey. Patricia was up for parole after serving 5 years of her 8-year sentence. I wrote a letter to the parole board detailing every abuse, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty. I attached psychological evaluations, evidence of her lack of remorse, expert testimony about her narcissistic personality disorder. Parole was denied. She'd serve her full sentence, and even then, she'd be a convicted felon. Her life as she'd known it was over. I didn't celebrate when I got the news, but I did feel a deep, abiding satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing justice has been served. As for me, I opened my own practice, Thornton Family Law, specializing in protecting children's rights and assets. I took on pro bono cases for kids whose parents were stealing from them, abusing them, gaslighting them into believing they were the problem. I taught them what I'd learned. Document everything, trust your instincts, build your case carefully, and strike only when you can win completely. I became the advocate I'd needed when I was 14 years old and reborn into a nightmare. One morning, a woman came into my office with her teenage daughter. The daughter looked tired, beaten down, resigned to being overlooked and underestimated. My husband's new wife is very controlling, the mother said carefully, and my daughter has a trust fund from her late grandfather. I'm worried about them stealing from it, I finished. About them isolating her from family. About them making her feel like she's the problem when really they're the predators. The mother's eyes widened. How did you know? I smiled at the daughter, who was looking at me with something like hope. Because I lived it, I said, and I survived it. And I'm going to make sure you do too. She started to cry, not from sadness, but from relief, from being seen, being believed, being helped. I handed her a tissue and pulled out my intake forms. Tell me everything, I said, and don't leave anything out. We're going to document it all, build an airtight case, and make sure they can never hurt you again. Because that's what I did now. I took the pain of my past and turned it into power for others. I took the knowledge bought with my death and used it to save lives. I took my second chance and made it count, and every time I helped another kid escape the family that was destroying them, I thought about that moment at my Sweet 16. The moment Madison's plan fell apart, the moment Patricia's mask slipped, the moment I finally got my revenge. Some people say revenge is hollow, that it doesn't heal wounds or fix damage. Maybe they're right. But justice is sacred. And watching people who hurt children face consequences, that's not revenge. That's righteous. And I'd spend the rest of my life making sure that righteousness prevailed, one case at a time. Because I died once and came back and learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something better from the ashes of what tried to destroy you. It's taking your pain and turning it into protection for others. It's surviving, thriving, and making sure no one else has to die at their Sweet 16 to get justice. That was my revenge. That was my victory. That was my second life, lived on my terms, fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.